Director for the RAC. Appreciate you all taking a little time this morning. We know there's been more interest this year in the state implementation plan, and a few folks are already writing about it. So we just wanted to give an opportunity to get questions from folks. We have about a 20-minute presentation. Mike and Wayne will be starting now, and we'll take questions after that. If you don't mind holding questions until the end, certainly a lot of things that are going to come up will probably be addressed in the next slide or two. But if there's something timely you want to put in chat, feel free. But if you want to be asking a question, we'll do those at the end. So I'm going to transfer this over to Mike and Wayne, who can introduce themselves and get started. Thank you.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm Mike Silverstein with the Regional Air Quality Council. I'm the Executive Director of the office, and it's a pleasure to speak with you all today. Wayne Xiong is also with the RAC. He's a staff member, our air quality planning expert, and there's Wayne on video now.
Hi, everyone.
Hello, and so both Wayne and I will be walking through the presentation today. We're kind of tag team on this, so as Dave mentioned, if you could hold your questions to the end, we have plenty of time to address things, and we're happy to go back through the slides, during the Q&A portion, just so that you have reference to the particular slide or topic that you have a concern or question about. So why don't we get started, and Wayne's going to advance the slides as we go through. So first slide here, what is the SIP, or the State Implementation Plan? And the SIP is all of the individual parts of a state's air quality program that's been approved by the EPA. So this is really an important distinction here. What's done in Colorado for air quality planning purposes may be included in the federally enforceable SIP, or it may not be. And so that's something to keep in mind here. The SIP is developed in compliance with requirements outlined in the Clean Air Act and federal regulations. So whatever the federal requirements or mandates are, the state needs to address those to have a robust air quality program. And then those are through regulations or policy submittals to the EPA. EPA then approves the plans, and those become federally enforceable. And typically EPA enforces regulations. So if it's not a regulatory effort, it's really not appropriate for the SIP. So Colorado's Ozone SIP, or plan, is a compilation of technical analyses, administrative information, and emission control programs. And part of this plan, it includes monitoring data, control strategies, emission inventories, attainment demonstrations, and numerous other elements. And all are federally enforceable control measures and strategies adopted by the state and approved by the EPA. So again, this is a distinction that we need to make throughout the presentation, that many strategies are appropriate for the SIP, because those are things that if Colorado fails to adequately implement, EPA has oversight responsibility if it's in the SIP. If it's a state-only strategy, something we do locally, then EPA doesn't get involved, and it's not to be included in the SIP. And so at the Regional Air Quality Council, we're part of the Colorado ozone planning process, and it's our responsibility to bring forward the air quality plan to the state for consideration. And so what our SIP does, it is really the compilation of all the efforts to bring, designed to bring the Denver Metro and North Front Range non-attainment area into attainment and maintenance, long-term maintenance of the national ambient air quality standards by the statutory deadlines. And that's really an important feature too. The plans have to have all the adequate and appropriate measures to get us to compliance with the various national ambient air quality standards, in this case ozone, by the due dates. Next slide. So what is developed for this air quality plan, this ozone SIP that we're talking about today? So we're developing two plans under two standards, and the plans include all required elements in federal regulation and under federal law, the Clean Air Act. We're projecting compliance with the 2000 ozone standard of 75 parts per billion by the 2027 attainment date. So again, we have two standards with two planning horizons. So the first is the 2008 standard of 75 parts per billion by 2027. And in our plan, we are including all elements that are required, and we believe we're satisfactorily addressing all EPA requirements in that portion of the plan. Now we have another standard, the more stringent standard adopted in 2015 by EPA of a lower ozone threshold of 70 parts per billion. And under the timelines, we have to be in compliance with the tougher standard earlier by 2024. And so we are not projecting in our plan that we can come into compliance with 70 parts per billion, in just 2 short years. And so even with the current package of federally enforceable strategies, we won't be able to get there on time. Within our plan, all elements, with the exception of this attainment demonstration, this projection of attainment, are satisfactorily addressed. So we're including in both plans satisfactory elements that EPA should be able to approve, except for this attainment demonstration for the tougher 70 parts per billion standard. So that really means additional federally enforceable strategies will need to be developed and implemented over the years to bring us into attainment with the 2015 standard. But it's not possible to get us into compliance by the next due date. Next. So when we have our plan, our presentation of our plan that's moving through the public comment process at the Regional Air Quality Council, these are the sections of the plan that are in what we call the SIP, or these are required SIP elements. And you can see on the right, we have 2 columns, one for the 2015 standard and one for the 2008 standard. We have 2 classifications that we're waiting for EPA to go final with. One is a moderate classification for 2015, and the other is the severe classification for 2008. Those are not in effect yet because EPA has not taken final action for our region, but we're anticipating that rulemaking at any time now. And so we have to address all these elements within our plans, and you can see that some of the elements are not required for the 2015 standard, but all are required for the 2008 standard. So essentially, all of these will be in place for our region because it's the same non-attainment area, the same region, our North Front Range, Denver Metro region. And so really the severe classification will drive the control requirements that you see here and the elements of the SIP. So it's a big document, Wayne, I don't know if we have a page count, but between the plan and the technical elements, we have thousands of pages worth of information that are being presented to the Regional Air Quality Council Board and then hopefully over to the Air Quality Control Commission for its consideration later this fall. So we're going to walk through some of these chapters with you today. Some of those we chose not to highlight, but we're happy to address with you, if necessary. Next slide. So as I mentioned, these are things that are included in the SIP, those chapters 1 through 15. But what's not included in the SIP? So what aren't we giving to the EPA for federal approval and then oversight or enforcement? So again, many controls are appropriate for the SIP. For example, industrial source and product formulation requirements, they have a long track record of implementation success and established compliance and enforcement regimes. So all regulations need to have numerous elements, the regulatory language, how you're going to demonstrate compliance, and how there's monitoring and enforcement. And then also we can take credit for these SIP measures in our modeling and our attainment demonstrations. So we can't take credit though for things that aren't part of the SIP. So we don't get the in our attainment demonstration analysis emission reduction credit, even though those things are happening in the real world, they're just not included in the plan and you can't take credit for things. And so we'll talk about that a little bit too. But then there are controls that should not be included in the SIP. But again, they're either considered as state only or they're just a natural part of our emission control programs. So example, land use and transportation measures, that require implementation flexibility and the ability to frequently change course. Again, state-only measures, they don't achieve or get SIP credit, but they're still important for improving our air quality. Next. So I'm going to turn things over to Wayne to go through some of the technical elements of our plan.
Thanks, Mike. So I want to start by highlighting the timeline of our historical and future classifications and attainment years. There's a lot on this slide, but I'd like you to focus on the bottom half of the graphic. As mentioned earlier, we're working to demonstrate attainment with two different standards, the 2008 standard and the 2015 standard. And we're currently classified as a serious non-attainment area under the 2008 standard and as a marginal non-attainment under the 2015 standard. Now, under both standards, we had an attainment date of 2021 based on monitor data from 2008 to 2020. And our monitor data didn't demonstrate attainment, so we're currently facing reclassification under both of the standards. And so we're looking at being reclassified to a severe non-attainment area for the 2008 standard with an attainment date in 2027, which then will be based on the 2024 and 2026 monitor data. And under the 2015 standard, we're looking to be classified to moderate non-attainment with an attainment date in 2024 based on 2021 to 2023 monitor data. So I want to show the trend of human-generated emissions for the 2008 ozone non-attainment, the ozone NACs. So first up is the nitrous oxides, showing the trend from 2011, which is the base year for that standard, up to 2026. And you can see the decline in these emissions over time as more regulations and efforts have been put in place to reduce these emissions, going from 320 tons per day back in 2011 to a projected 129 tons per day in 2026. Similarly, volatile organic compounds decreased over the past years from a high of 518 tons per day in 2011 down to projected 285 in 2026. And so if you'd like to get into more specifics of these numbers, you can look at our presentations from January 2022 or look in chapters 3 and 4 in the draft SIP. And I'll drop a link to the SIPs later in chat. So as part of submitting the SIP, we conduct modeling to understand the future year scenarios. So for the 2015, we're looking at future year 2023. And for the 2008 standard, we're looking at a future year of 2026. And modeling incorporates a lot of the hard sciences of physics and chemistry that goes on in the atmosphere, taking into account meteorology and emissions to project what ozone concentrations are like for those years. So in each of, we conduct an attainment demonstration that relies on photochemical grid modeling of these different future years to demonstrate whether the area will be in compliance with these standards by those dates. But modeling is just one tool, and it certainly can't account for everything. And so we also conduct a weight of evidence demonstration, which is a discussion that supports the modeling and attainment demonstration and considers all the available data that can evaluate the reasonableness of these model results and supplements the model. So I want to show you the initial modeling results that we have for the two different standards. First is the 2008 standard of 75 parts per billion And for that, we model the year 2026. And our model results for these different monitors across the entire non-attainment area show that we are projected to meet the 75 parts per billion standard. You can see that all our future design values are below 75. Next, we want to show the 2015 standard of 70 parts per billion, which has an attainment year of 2023. These results for the same monitors show that we will not be able to project an attainment for this standard. Now, of course, we've seen the recent years of high ozone values, and so we know that there's more to do to continue working on attaining this lower standard, this more stringent standard. So Mike, I'll pass it on to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Wayne. And there's a lot there that Wayne just described, and in our summary slides. So again, I'm happy to address your questions once we're finished. So this is a slide that describes the emission control strategies over the past 10, 12 years that have been put into place, and some go way back prior to 2011. The air quality program in Colorado is a robust program. It's been improved and strengthened since the 1970s. And so this is just a kind of a bullet list of measures that have been implemented over time. And so I'd like to focus our attention really in this last column on the right. So we have strategies that have been implemented for 2020 that are really reducing emissions and have been in place for a couple of years now. But we have strategies that have been under development and just either adopted at the state level or implemented here locally that are going to continue to gain further emission reductions over the projections from the past. And so this list of strategies to the right here, range from industrial source emission control strategies under various state authorities and state programs to the voluntary and incentive-based programs that we've either operated here at the Regional Air Quality Council or other state agencies or local governments have put into place. So this isn't a comprehensive list, and it definitely doesn't give you the detail on each. And again, we'd be happy to go through some of the details here at the end. But this is just to provide information that the future can look better than what our modeling projects. Our modeling is used in context. It's an estimate of where we're going to be at those monitoring sites in the future. And these strategies that are described here in this final column will help to further emission reductions as we move into the coming years. Next. And a couple things to really focus on, some of the new strategies that will result from being downgraded or reclassified by EPA to the tougher classifications of moderate and severe. Again, those haven't taken effect yet because EPA hasn't taken final action, but again, we're anticipating those decisions at any time by EPA. And so one of those is what we call non-attainment new source review. And so when we're reclassified to a more stringent category like severe for our non-attainment area, the threshold for what's called a major source drops. And you can see the table here. We start at 100 tons per year as what we've been operating for many years as a significant source in our non-attainment area. And it's been dropping with the classification. So once we go severe,
making coffee. I heard the coffee maker going.
Will be 25 tons per year. So a major source went from 100 down to 25, and that's a big jump for these pollutants of volatile organic compounds and NOx. And again, those are the pollutants that form ozone in our atmosphere, with our hot summer temperatures and sunlight. And so we're going to go to a 25 ton per year threshold. So if you're a major source or even what used to be a minor source, you're subject to what are called Title V permitting and layer and offsets, which means lowest achievable emission rate for your facility if you have to either re-permit as an existing facility because you want to expand or you need to do some significant changes, or you're a new source coming into the area, you have to put on the best emission control technology. And there's always something left over. So that leftover needs to be offset. You have to go out, if you're an industrial source, and find where either within your company or another company, if they've achieved excess emission reductions, you have to take advantage of those excess emission reductions that are either on the market to be traded or to, that you have an arrangement for. So basically you're offsetting what's left over at a greater degree than what you're emitting. And so that will drive stationary source emissions down in the future. This will take time as sources, re-permit, but we're projecting lower emissions from the stationary source category into the future. Next slide. And another element of our plan that's new are contingency measures. So contingency measures are strategies that are enacted if the region fails to achieve attainment by the required date, or we fail to demonstrate reasonable further progress in our inventory reductions that Wayne described earlier. So we have attainment dates of 2027 and 2024 for the two different standards. And if we don't comply with those standards on time, the contingency measures are triggered. And so we have to adopt these in advance, and they sort of wait in the wings for implementation upon a finding that we failed to attain on time. And so the whole point of contingency measures under the Clean Air Act construct is that an area needs to achieve continued progress towards reducing emissions if you fail to achieve attainment by the due dates. And so the next slide describes our contingency measures. And this is a new requirement for us. We've been able to comply with the contingency measures, Wayne, next slide, in the past by taking credit for emission reductions that are happening naturally, like lower emissions from the automobile or the mobile source sector. Well, recent court decisions have said EPA's model for the contingency measures was inappropriate, and areas have to have these strategies that are waiting in the wings for implementation. And so we're putting into our plan two new strategies. They may not be adequate because EPA has not issued guidance yet, because all these court decisions are within the last year, of what contingency measures need to achieve from an emission reduction perspective, but we definitely have to have strategies as a placeholder. So we're starting with these. And so we have two here. We're going to have tougher consumer products requirements. Those are emission requirements for architectural and industrial maintenance coatings, consumer products, and other chemicals that are in almost every aspect of our life. They have to be lower emitting over time. We already have tough consumer products requirements, but they have to go to the next level as a contingency measure. And these would take effect if we don't achieve the 2008 standard in 2027. The contingency strategy we have for the 2015 strategy, which would take effect after 2024 if we fail to attain, which is likely, would be California's control measures for automotive coatings. So this would reduce emissions from adhesives and paints and solvents and clear coating chemicals and paints used in this sector. And those would achieve some additional emission reductions from that application. So those are two new requirements that will go into place if we fail to achieve the standards on time. But they don't go in place sooner than an EPA determination of failing to achieve compliance on time. Next. And another strategy that will go into place without action by the state is reformulated gasoline. And I know that many of you have heard about this or maybe reported on it. So reformulated gasoline, or RFG, it's basically a standard for the volatility of gasoline in the summer months. So there's a standard set by the EPA nationally for RFG for all non-attainment areas that are subject. And many non-attainment areas have had reformulated gasoline since the 1990s. So this isn't a new requirement for the country, but it is a new requirement for us. And this goes in place by matter of federal law without action by the state, without choice by the state, because of the reclassification to severe. So once we go severe by EPA rule, reformulated gasoline has to go in place 1 year later at the beginning of the next summer season of gasoline, which typically begins in May of a year. So likely we would see reformulated gasoline in the summertime of 2024 and beyond. And so again, it's a tougher standard for the volatility or how easily this fuel evaporates or causes emissions out of the tailpipe. And so we're projecting fairly good emission reductions from reformulated gasoline from the on-road mobile sources, cars and trucks on our highways. And then also that we don't account for here are any other applications that use gasoline, lawn and garden equipment, off-road or non-road equipment that uses gasoline, small engines, generators, industrial equipment or commercial equipment. And so we'll likely see better benefit than what's shown here on the slide. But we will see benefit throughout our non-attainment area of the emissions of VOCs and NOx, and that will help us gain further progress towards attaining the ozone standards. Next. I think we're back to Wayne.
Yes, so back to me. As an overview, to recap, we're submitting 2 state implementation plans for the severe SIP submitting a severe SIP under the 2008 standard of 75 parts per billion with a July 2027 attainment date based on 2024 to 2026 monitoring data. We're submitting a moderate SIP under the 2015 ozone standard of 70 parts per billion with an August 2024 attainment date based on 2021 to 2023 monitoring data. We conducted photochemical grid modeling that demonstrates the area will attain the 75 parts per billion standard by 2026. But current modeling and the monitoring values that we know from 2021 indicate that the area will not attain the 70 parts per billion standard by 2023. So the RAC has put up a draft of the SIP that is available for public comment. So I am going to put that link to the page that has all of the SIP documents we have up. And we welcome any feedback that you have. There are 2 ways to do that. You can submit your comments in writing to sipcomments@rac.org through July 27th, or you can join us for our board meeting if you'd like to share your comments in person. Please sign up for the board meeting and sign up for public comment by emailing Misty Howell. I want to highlight some of the important dates coming up. In addition to the August 5th board meeting, where we're taking public comments and seeking a RAC board endorsement of the SIP package, we also have September 14th request for SIP rulemaking at that AQCC meeting. And then throughout the fall months from September to December is the AQCC rulemaking process. And then we'll have a hearing on December 13th for the SIP rulemaking hearing. And the RAC staff will continue to be available for offline discussions if anyone wants to reach out to us. And we're always looking to engage with the community. So there's the last slide. What's next? We are continuing efforts to identify and implement and expand strategies to improve air quality in our communities. Because we anticipate not attaining the 2015 ozone NAAQS by 2024 and expecting the EPA to downgrade our region to serious under that standard. And we're continuing that iterative process of developing SIPs to address that standard, including exploring new strategies and contingency measures. And we're engaging in more modeling analyses to develop a better understanding of future ozone trends, especially given light of potentially more severe meteorological conditions. And of course, we're always looking to engage with our partners and community members. So with that, thank you all for joining and being a part of this discussion.
Great, thank you again. We have a pretty small group. Folks should have the ability to unmute themselves. So if you do have a question for Mike and Wayne, please go ahead and unmute yourself. And if you could include the outlet you're with, that would be helpful. Oh, actually, to start with, I see we have a question from Scott in chat. Mike, how does the EPA factor in the 50% plus contribution of biogenic VOCs in deciding how to categorize the region? Is there a waiver process for that?
Okay, great. And Wayne and I will tag team on the questions here. So I'm not sure where the 50% biogenic number comes from, but essentially you don't get a waiver for natural emissions or emissions that we receive from upwind states. So we know that we have a background concentration in our region for ozone of about anywhere from, it could be 40 to 60 parts per billion on any summer day. Sometimes it might even be lower, maybe once in a while it's higher. So we essentially assume that we have control of about 25 to 30% of the ozone in our region. And that's what we're responsible for developing strategies for to control. We hopefully will gain emission reductions in our upwind neighbor states and in the international community as new strategies are implemented over time, but you don't get a waiver for natural emissions. It's part of the ozone situation. Other areas have the same background, the same or even higher biogenic emissions, but they're complying with the standard because they have either better meteorology, they don't trap air quality or air pollutants in the region due to terrain or the unique features we have in our Front Range. But you don't get a pass from the EPA. We have to come into compliance unless you can demonstrate that your exceedances are due to exceptional events like wildfire or international contributions. But those are very, very difficult justifications to make to show that those were the driving force of your non-attainment. So we're faced with controlling emissions in our region and not taking advantage of exemptions or other things that simply don't exist at the federal level. Should we just walk through the chat, Dave, here? So the number comes from the report on biogenic. So maybe Wayne, you could look at that one and get back to us on that 50% value. Another question, Michael Booth says, does RAC believe these measures have the right sense of urgency? In October, RAC presented to the Air Commission and acknowledged the level of non-attainment and the readings from the sensors. Did these measures go far enough, fast enough? So we think that this is a comprehensive science-based plan that brings us closer to meeting air quality goals. The plan includes actions needed to bring us into compliance with less stringent ozone standards and closer to attaining the more stringent standard in the next few years. There, of course, is always more that needs to be done to achieve compliance of all air quality standards, and we are formulating new approaches during the next 2 years. So our work isn't done, as that kind of conclusory slide that's up on the screen still says. We have to do more. We have to find and scope out additional control strategies to get us into compliance with the official ozone standard of 70 parts per billion as soon as we can. But we know that we can't implement a strategy by next summer that will get us into compliance with 70 in just one short year. Okay, we're back to the 50% contribution of biogenic VOCs by itself exceeded the EPA regulations. Has the state asked for an exemption for the biogenic contribution in the past? again, Wayne, are you familiar with the 50% biogenic VOC piece?
I will have to look into that. But the regulations are on ozone and ozone formation. So the EPA is only about targeting the level of ozone, and biogenic VOCs play a part in that, but there's no direct regulation on biogenic VOCs.
And that's correct. And if you have a great amount of biogenic VOCs, which most non-attainment areas do, you also need NOx, which is really a human form emission, to form ozone with those VOCs. So we have many parts of our state, actually the rest of our state, that have high VOCs due to biogenics that are not in non-attainment because they don't have the industrial and human activities that produce NOx. So again, there is no exception under federal regulation or law because you have 50% contribution of biogenics to your non-attainment problem or to your emission profile. And biogenics don't necessarily form ozone as readily as human-caused VOCs. So some emissions are highly reactive, some are not as reactive. And so we may have a lot of biogenics in our region, but we also have a lot of NOx that we cause and we contribute that form the high ozone that we experience. Why don't we take we have a hands up here from Katie Cheshire.
Yeah, I was wondering, are there additional control measures designed to try to achieve that 2015 standard that are in the 2015 plan that are not in the 2008 plan?
No, we have only strategies in our plan to improve air quality. And those strategies that are programmed, they're on the books on the way, as we refer to them. Those measures are improving air quality, reducing emissions, and are projected to get us to compliance with the 75 standard by 2027, probably earlier. I think in our modeling by 2023, we're under 75 at all monitoring sites in that year of 2023, according to our modeling. We don't have as much confidence in the shorter term numbers because of the confounding issues of more severe meteorology that we've been experiencing in some of our summers, and also the wildfire impacts that contribute to but don't drive our ozone values. They just add to the already high ozone that we have in our region. And so all strategies are in place to improve air quality. They're just not getting us to compliance by 2024. And so that tells us that we need to do more to get to reducing emissions even further so that we can comply with air quality standards, hopefully by 2027, which is the Regional Air Quality Council stated goal. Knowing that we can't get there by 2024, we would like the region to be able to attain by 2027. But that's the challenge ahead of us. So another chat comment, can you give some specific examples of what the industrial coatings rule changes will be? For example, what products, what industries? Wayne, are you familiar with that rule itself as to what would be affected under the contingency measure that would take a it's really the tougher standard that some East Coast and California communities have adopted?
Yes, exactly. I will have to get back to you on the specifics of that rule. But yes, these are rules that have been explored and implemented in other regions that we're hoping to bring in as part of our contingency measures.
I think that was Noel. We can definitely follow up with you after.
Okay, another chat comment from Scott. The only exception you can get are what are called exceptional events. So you're faced with controlling your ozone locally until you get to a point where you can attain federal health standards over the long term. So you come into compliance and you have long-term attainment. And so you deal with the emissions and the transported ozone into your region. as you need to under the federal requirements and guidelines. And so the only exceptions that there are for international emissions and for what are called exceptional events. So if there is, for example, a stratospheric ozone intrusion on a particular day, that's the ozone that occurs naturally in our upper atmosphere that is forced down to ground level. And so it's the same ozone, it's the same, pollutant. It's just, it's not a pollutant for us if it's protecting us in our upper atmosphere from UV radiation from the sun. But once in a while, especially at our elevation, we see weather systems that drive this stratospheric ozone down to the ground level. That happens a lot in the spring in our region. And so those can be classified as exceptional events by the state, not by the RAC, but by the state, and submitted to the EPA to say, hey, this is something out of our control. It's stratospheric ozone intrusion outside of our traditional high ozone, not our high ozone season. And EPA could grant that exclusion if you provide the appropriate scientific analysis that demonstrates that it really was stratospheric ozone. Another one is wildfire. And so what happens when we have a wildfire event, especially wildfire that you can directly attribute to the high ozone readings. So for example, the August and September local fires of 2020, the big fires of Rocky Mountain National Park and in northern Colorado, that really had a direct impact on air quality, where we just saw ozone and particulates spike dramatically because of this local smoke that just pounded our region and caused high ozone. So those can be excluded from the data sets that are used to determine whether you're attaining or not attaining. And so if you have enough of these, if those are the drivers of your problem, then you don't have to really develop significant plans. But we haven't been able to demonstrate that without wildfire, we're going to get to compliance. We have our local problem that we're adding to, that the rest of Colorado, Wyoming, all our neighbor states don't have. They have the wildfire intrusions. They have long-range transported smoke that impacts their areas as well, but they're not non-attainment for the ozone standards. And so if there is appropriate analysis that you can provide the EPA and that EPA concurs with, then you can exclude monitored values. But you still have to demonstrate that that's the only reason you're in non-attainment. Otherwise, you have to go through the process we're going through now.
We have another question from Katie at Westbrook.
I was just wondering how much confidence you have in the accuracy of the modeling.
Well, we perform modeling based on EPA criteria. And so everyone that's in the ozone SIP planning process utilizes very similar approaches, and we share information across the country. Contractors that do work for us work in all of the other areas. We don't do this work in-house. We rely on contractors to do the work for us. And there are tests that we do to make sure the model works appropriately. You have to predict within certain specifications what past ozone levels were with the modeling platform. And the modeling is a compilation, and Wayne could describe this in much more greater detail if you wish, but it's the meteorology that we experience in a given high ozone year. 2016 is our base year for our ozone modeling platform, and this is a national base year used in most ozone planning efforts. It's a more recent high ozone season that has good analysis of the meteorology, but also good emission inventory information from all industrial facilities, mobile source activities across the country, and chemistry that basically all emissions aren't equal. Different volatile organic compounds have different chemical reactivity and form ozone either more readily or less readily with the presence of NOx and with sunlight. And so all of this goes into our modeling base year estimates. So we have to predict what the monitors measure within a certain plus or minus, and with a certain level of precision. And then once we're in a good place, we project forward by a change in the emission inventories. So if our inventory estimates for 2023 or 2026, those are our 2 years, once we go through a process to come up with appropriate emission inventories for all the different categories, then we rerun the modeling with just that one change, and we project out into the future. And so we know that the modeling isn't perfect, but modeling is never perfect, and it's used in a relative way. So if you take the percent change between your base modeling results and your future modeling, you apply that then to the monitoring values of the past. So that's the only way to estimate what ozone will be in the future is through this modeling exercise. And we know there's always improvements, and the state really drives the development of the emission inventories, and they're always looking for better methodologies and better data to improve our emission inventories, these estimates of emissions from every activity in our society. We calculate emissions for consumer products, for mobile sources, for construction, for industrial activity, for oil and gas, for off-road equipment, for motorboats. I mean, you name it, there's an estimate of emissions. And those estimates can be very general or they can be very specific. And those are always under improvement. But we hope that our modeling gives us an indication of the trend. Is it in an upward trajectory or downward? Even with growth, even with more commercial activity, with more people, more vehicle miles traveled, all those things, we're estimating that it's countered by the improvements in emissions from our vehicles, from our commercial and industrial activities due to the control programs that have been put in place at the federal and state levels. And so we're working with the research community to look at our modeling and our inventory approaches to see if they would agree that it's okay, or where we can improve. And we're always listening to that community, and we have a process that we're undertaking that will be assessing our tools in the future. But they're meeting specs. They're the best. That's the best tool out there. It's I think one of the more comprehensive emission inventories and modeling platforms in the nation. And a lot of work has gone into this. But we continue to improve, and we look for better ways to estimate how we're doing in that with the technical tools available to us. Wayne, I think you could address this one. How many ozone monitoring stations are there, and how many of them recorded excessive ozone in 2020?
Sure. Just give me a second to count that up. So we have 16 monitors currently. And for 2020, let me see. 9 of those monitors recorded above 75 parts per billion in 2020. And 5 of them reported between 71 and 75 parts per billion.
One of the things that everyone needs to understand about ozone monitoring is that, we get high ozone values throughout the summer. But what really matters for compliance with federal standards is the 4th maximum concentration at each site. So essentially the standard allows for 3 exceedances of the ozone standard. It's an 8-hour average of the measurements throughout the day. So ozone, is measured continuously, and you come up with a 1-hour value for each value at each monitor. And then you look at those 1-hour those 1-hour measured values, and you look at 8-hour blocks. So it's an 8-hour average each day. So you take your highest 8-hour ozone concentration, and that's your number for the day. And if it's above the standard, that's what we call an exceedance. And you're allowed 3 exceedances a year. The 4th one is what you use in determining compliance. And so all of these 16 monitors that Wayne described have to measure a 4th maximum concentration in a year below the standard of 75 or 70. Really 70 is the driving standard. 75 is an artifact. It was updated in 2015, but the courts still require us to, and EPA requires the states to show compliance with 75 and with 70 and all the control programs that go with each one. And so when Wayne says we have a great number of sites in 2020 that recorded values above 70, that says we have a problem. But we have data on our website that you can go to, and Wayne, maybe you could put the link into the chart we use to update the rack board each month about our ozone standing. It's the yellow chart. That so put a link to that in our chat, and you can see the number of days each year where an ozone monitor in our region recorded an exceedance of either 70 or 75.
So as far as the contingency measures, why are those measures not included in the SIP unless non-attainment happens again?
Okay, these strategies are required under federal law. So even if we put in these strategies into the plan, the federal law says, well, what are you going to put in place of those? You have to have a contingency strategy in place that gets you to further emission reductions for failing to attain on time. So we've always done that, exactly what you've said. If there's a strategy that we believe is appropriate, we've either recommended those to the state, or the state on its own has adopted those as a real strategy that implements measures that reduce emissions as quickly as possible. But the Clean Air Act says you have to have these strategies that wait in the wings in case you fail to comply. And so this is something that, again, it's the court has ruled that EPA didn't apply the contingency measures properly across the country for the past 20 or more years in ozone SIPs. And so this is the requirement of the courts and now of EPA to say states go back and adopt these strategies that wait in the wings until they're triggered by a finding of non-compliance. But they could be, as we gain more knowledge of these strategies, they could be adopted at any time as mandatory for implementation by a scheduled date. But right now they're being used as the strategies, as I would call them placeholder strategies, in case we fail to comply. And we may need to add more contingency measures. When EPA comes out with guidance based on the court rulings about what the contingency requirements are for SIPs, we may have to go back to the Air Commission with additional recommendations for more strategies that either achieve a certain level of emission reduction or a certain degree of applicability throughout a non-attainment area, according to this guidance. EPA hasn't issued this guidance, and we're hoping to see it by the end of the year.
We have just another couple minutes here. Does anyone else have a question for us? All right, well, in that case, thank you all again for attending. If you do have follow-up questions, you all have my email. This is David. Sorry, I'm off camera here to be able to utilize the mic. And please feel free to send those over, and I'll make sure we follow up promptly. So thank you all again.